How's it going, and welcome back to another video. If this is your first time on my channel, thanks for joining us. And if you're a returning viewer, thanks for joining us. If you haven't already subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Give me a like if this video is good enough for it. And also maybe go check me out on Instagram. But anyways, let's get into today's video. I have got me some 50mm lenses, and we're going to see how they run on the a6500 here. So the three lenses I have are the Sony 50mm 1.8 optical steady shot. This is an APS-C only lens. I've got Canon's classic Nifty 50, which is ultra cheap. It's a full frame lens, but it works great on an APS-C body. I have also got Nikon's 50mm 1.8G, and it's also a full frame lens, works great. All three of these lenses are the exact same focal length regardless of crop factor, so let's see how they compare head to head. Alright, so let's kick things off with the price. First, the Nikon and the Canon need adapters to work on Sony, and I'm using smart adapters and they get kind of pricey, so that price is going to be factored in, and we're going to make a judgment call as to who these are for at the end of the video. So the optical steady shot Sony native lens is $300, and that's all you need to buy. Just the lens, you're ready to go, works great. Then there's the Nikon lens. I've got Comlight's latest adapter, the ENF EN1. Their version 6 firmware has fixed a lot of the problems, and it actually works very well. However, the adapter alone will set you back $370, and then about $215 for the lens, puts you at about a $580 setup. So that's pretty freaking expensive for a 50mm lens. But you might be able to justify getting the adapter for additional lenses as well. Canon's 50mm is notoriously cheap at right around $100. Right now it's $125 on Amazon. I've heard that you can get these as cheap as 40 or 50 bucks on eBay if you find a deal, but we're going with the new prices. So $125 for the Nifty 50 and another $260 for the Sigma MC11 adapter. That's the one I'm using. I know it's not officially supported, and that's going to be taken into consideration as we progress through this review. So this puts your total at $375, but if you go with a officially supported adapter like the Metabones, which is 400 bucks, this boosts this setup to $515. Now again, you can justify the adapter with different additional lenses, but that's just what it is. The Sony is the smallest in both dimensions when compared to the other two on their respective adapters in both length and diameter. The Sony is the smallest. Next up is the Canon. The Canon's a little bit taller than the Sony and a little bit bigger in diameter, but other than that, they're not that much different. And then what seems to tower over the other two is the Nikon and its adapter. While the Nikon lens itself is almost as tall as the Sony lens, it's bigger in diameter, and you have to throw a adapter on the back of it. So this lens gets pretty huge. As far as build quality goes, the Sony definitely takes the cake for being the sleekest, the most futuristic feeling lens. It's got the nicest finish on it as far as being pretty, but it is definitely not the most durable. On the other hand, the Canon is very plasticky. There is no metal anywhere on this lens except for the contacts on the back. So plastic mount, plastic body, plastic focus ring, plastic everything. Now, the most robust feeling lens by a long shot is the Nikon. While it is all plastic except for the mount, the plastic on it has got this nice texture on it. It feels nice and solid, it's stiff. The Canon you can feel flex in your fingers if you squeeze it. The Nikon feels solid. It feels like you could drop this thing several times, not even have to think about it. Just pick it up and run with it. So while we're talking about the physical properties of the lens, let's talk about the manual focusing and how that works. On the Canon, there's a very short throw between infinity and close focus, so you've got every little adjustment changes focus quite a bit, and it's not the smoothest ring. It kind of sticks and jumps on you, so it's a little challenging when you're trying to nail that precise focus. The Nikon, on the other hand, I think is the best. It's a mechanical focusing, so it's not focused by wire. It's got a little distance focusing window, so you know what distance you're focused in at. It's got a grippy focus ring with a decent amount of throw, so you've got a little bit more incremental changes there, and it's nice and smooth, so you don't have to worry about jumping back and forth past where you want to be in focus. Speaking of jumping back and forth past where you want to be in focus, comes the focus by wire system that's on the Sony. When I was taking some pictures that I was trying to really nail the focus for this comparison here, I noticed that when I was trying to get a very specific point in focus, I zoomed all the way in camera and was just barely turning this, and I was turning it so slow that it didn't change anything. So then I'd speed up just a little bit to change it, and it would almost click past where I wanted to focus. So it was almost as if I had to compromise where I wanted to focus, because it was either back focused or front focused. So it took a very particular touch to get it focused correctly. So Nikon comes out the winner for the manual focusing. And so now let's jump over to the autofocus speed. The Sony by far wins. It is blistering fast because it's a native lens, and it is accurate and consistent and reliable. Definitely fantastic autofocusing on the Sony. The Canon I found to be the worst. This could be because of the adapter, but it was a little slow, and several times, I noticed that the pictures I took with it were just completely out of focus. I even took an entire series of pictures that were supposed to be a sharpness test, and all of them were out of focus. I shot 4 shots on this thing at the exact same building with autofocus single shot. All of them were out of focus, so that's kind of weird, kind of annoying, but a lot of the shots I took with it ended up in perfect focus, so it's kind of weird. I don't know why it's off, but it is. The Nikon, on the other hand, was reasonably quick, pretty similar to the speed of the Canon actually, but much more accurate. It pretty much nailed every shot I wanted to. I mean, when you go to take a picture with this thing and the ComLight adapter, and just what you're thinking about what you wanted to be in focus, it seemed to grab that and focus on it. Very happy with how this combination works. The continuous autofocus seemed to work pretty well in all 3 lenses. The Canon and the Nikon were pretty well matched with how quickly it tracked subjects, how fast you could move and have it stay on the same subject. And Sony again was head and shoulders above the competition with being able to stick to whatever it focused on as you moved quickly around. The video autofocus is a completely different story though, because it just plain doesn't work with either of these lenses on the adapters that I have for them. The Metabones adapter may bring functionality for the Canon lens into play, but I don't have that. It doesn't work. The Sony, on the other hand, wonderful autofocus in video, absolutely perfect. All right, so now what everybody's been waiting for, image quality. So what we've got here is Canon in red, Sony in blue, and Nikon in yellow. Let's first check out the Nikon and the Canon at f1.8. So as we can see at f1.8, there's a decent amount of detail here. I have noticed the Nikon meter's about 1/3 of a stop brighter, so it does crank up the shutter speed to compensate. So there's a little bit of an exposure difference with all the shots on these lenses. Zooming in, we can see that the Nikon looks a tad sharper, definitely has a little bit more contrast to it. We are a little bit off center here. Let's jump right as close to the center as we can get, and it definitely looks as if the Nikon is sharper. There's just more detail, there's more contrast here. I think it wins in the center sharpness, but let's go check out the corners and see what happens up here. The Canon seems to have some kind of smearing going on, and the Nikon is blurry, but it's not the worst I've ever seen. Let's stay away from the corners. But at the top side of the picture, the Canon looks much better than the Nikon. So I'm gonna say Nikon was the overall winner of that, so let's pit him up against the Sony. So now we have the Sony over here on the left. Jumping into the same spot, it's disappointing. It's really disappointing. Hey everybody, come see how disappointing this is. Anyways, so the way that this worked was when the Sony was wide open, I couldn't get focus peaking to pick up anything. It was so blurry. Like nothing. Look at how blurry these rocks are. I couldn't get it to pick up anything. I went in and out. I jumped all over the place trying to find something that it would highlight red. It did not do anything when I was punched in. It lit up fine when I was zoomed all the way out, but when I went in to try and get some details, the focus peaking, it was so soft, it didn't pick up anything. So, generally disappointed with how the Sony does wide open. The Nikon absolutely smokes it in absolutely every place on this image here. So, the Sony gets a big fat thumbs down, wide open. So let's go ahead and step it down to f5.6. Maybe the Sony can redeem itself. Looks pretty much identical. Sony's got a little bit more contrast. As far as the sharpness goes, I don't think there's any real difference. I'm going to call this one a tie. Let's go check out the corner here. It does look like Sony may have pulled through and gotten the edge in the corners. The Nikon has got a little bit of red and green going on there and is a little bit softer. Meanwhile, the Sony is fringe free since '93 and looks reasonably sharp, still pretty soft in the corners. Now these next images we're not going to spend too much time on, but I do want to show you guys how the Canon missed focus in every single shot here. So we see the Sony looks pretty sharp, pretty contrasty, overall very good. The Canon is kind of blurry all over the place. So let's take a look at the Nikon. These are f2.8 by the way. The Nikon looks ridiculously sharp, even sharper than the Sony looked. It's even more noticeable at f1.8 where you can see it is substantially out of focus and the Nikon is incredibly sharp. Now there is one thing that shows up in this image that might be worth noting, is that the out of focus fringing on these two lenses. The Canon kind of has more of a blur around everything, like a halo. The Nikon has got a distinct purple fringe on the back focus. The Sony has less color fringing, but it has that same haze that the Canon had on the out of focus areas. Speaking of the out of focus areas, let's see how the bokeh compares on these three lenses. So let's jump into the Canon and the Sony here. As you can see, the Canon has got very harsh edges on it. It's kind of distracting, kind of out there. The Sony, meanwhile, has got very smooth, very soft. It kind of just fades out into its surroundings. The Canon has got a very distinct shape. Now for the Nikon is actually very similar to the Canon here. You can see it's got a very similar shape to it, a similar look, but it's kind of right between the Canon and the Sony. Let's jump down to f5.6 here and take a look. The Canon has got a 5-bladed aperture, so it creates these little pentagons all over the place, which isn't a bad thing. You can definitely take advantage of that and make for some interesting shots. The Nikon has got a rounded 7-blade aperture, which produces very circular bokeh balls with maybe just a hint of flat sides to it. And the Sony has also got a rounded 7-blade aperture, so it looks nearly identical to the Nikon in shape when it's stopped down. All these lenses have got some vignetting that is pretty significant when it's wide open, but they get better, but it's pretty much completely fixed by 5.6. Here we have the Canon at f1.8, f2.8, so there's quite a difference there, and then at f5.6, so not as much of a difference between 2.8 and 5.6. Now the Nikon is quite dark. There's quite a lot of vignetting there, and then up to 2.8, which just look at that huge jump there. Nikon, tons of vignetting. From 2.8 to 5.6, the image gets darker, but pretty much about the same as far as the even lighting goes. So now the Sony is a little darker, but there isn't as much of a jump between 1.8 and 2.8, and then there is a pretty good jump between 2.8 and 5.6. So that's how the image quality compares on these three lenses. I think I covered pretty much all the bases I could have covered. I know these are very kind of sterile kind of images to really evaluate the image quality, not so much the artistic images you can get with these lenses. 51.8s are fantastic with getting artsy with, because you can really blow out the background, really isolate your subject. On an APS-C body, it makes for a great portrait focal length, but it is not the end-all be-all walk-around lens like it is on a full-frame camera. If you want a great walk-around focal length, get a 35mm, so your crop factor puts you back up at 50, and that is what you want for running around town. 50mm is great on APS-C, but if you want the 50mm look, like what people talk about on full-frame cameras, go with 35mm. It's more versatile when cropped down, and you're going to get more use out of it. I personally rarely use 50mm lenses on an APS-C body, but ever since I got the A7R II, I can't seem to take them off. So take that info and do what you want with it. So who should get what lens? So Here's the deal. If you just bought an A6000 series camera of some sort and you're looking for something to give you a little bit more professional look, the 50mm optical steady shot is going to be the one you want to go with. It's got built-in stabilization. These lenses do not. The in-body stabilization does work just fine with these lenses, and it does electronically connect, so you don't have to manually set that. But this lens is great. It provides adequate image quality in a tiny little package, and it's got great autofocus in both video and photos, and you don't need to buy any adapters. $300 get you in the door and shooting with this one. The Nikon and the Canon, on the other hand, are going to be a little squirrely because they are adapted lenses and you're going to lose some autofocus functionality, but they are very good lenses. But the only reason I would recommend buying them is if you had a bunch of Nikon lenses that you also wanted to adapt with this adapter, or if you had a bunch of Canon lenses that you wanted to adapt with the MC11 or Metabones adapter. I've got the Sigma 18-35, which I needed to get the Sigma MC11 adapter for, so grabbing one of these for $60 to $100 just wouldn't be a bad deal. I just borrowed this one from a friend though. Now the Nikon, if I had to pick a favorite of these three lenses, the Nikon would be my favorite for shooting pictures because it is definitely the sharpest. It's got very reliable autofocus. I didn't have any autofocus issues that I had with the Canon, and it just feels right. It takes great pictures, it autofocuses great. This is the one I reach for when I want to shoot with the 50 and have autofocus. If I want to shoot with the 50 with manual focus, I'll grab one of my Minolta lenses. I like those a lot. But hopefully this video answers any and all questions that you would have about these lenses here. If you have any other questions, leave a comment down below. I'll be happy to check those out and answer them to the best of my ability. And if I don't have an answer for you, I will do some tests and try and figure it out. But thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. Check me out on Instagram. If you haven't already, there's going to be a link down there somewhere. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.